I was in the laundry room when I heard them. The door was half open and they didn't know I was still home. My son was talking, then my daughter-in-law, then my son again. The words came through the wall the way cold does in January, not all at once, just a slow seep until you're shivering and you don't know exactly when it started. She makes everything harder than it needs to be. Every single time, I know, but what do you want me to do? I want you to talk to her before she comes, or, honestly, maybe she just doesn't come this year. I set the laundry basket down on the floor very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake. I have a house in Oakville. I have lived in this house for 31 years. My husband Walter and I bought it the year our son was 7 and our daughter was 4, and we painted the shutters ourselves because we couldn't afford to hire anyone. Walter died 6 years ago in March, and I have lived here alone since then, which I have mostly made my peace with. The garden keeps me busy. The neighbours know my name. The Tim Hortons on the corner knows my order. My name is Winifred. My grandchildren call me Nan. I turn 68 in October. My son's name is Kevin. He is 41 years old, and he works in commercial real estate, and he has a good life that I am proud of, mostly. He married a woman named Sasha 12 years ago. Sasha is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly, because what comes next could make her sound like one, and the truth is more complicated than that. Sasha is someone who has never been entirely comfortable with me, and I have spent 12 years trying to close that distance, and I have not managed it, and somewhere in the last few years I stopped noticing that I was still trying. My daughter is Nora. She lives in Vancouver now. She and I talk on the phone every Sunday. That Thanksgiving, Kevin and Sasha had come over to drop off some things my grandson Marcus had left at my place the weekend before. His hockey bag, his library book, a single sneaker that I still cannot explain. They let themselves in with the key I gave Kevin when Walter got sick and never asked to give back. I was downstairs sorting laundry. They did not check. They did not call out. They just started talking in the kitchen, the way people talk when they think a house is empty. I stood in the laundry room for a long time after they left. I did not go upstairs and say anything. I did not call Kevin that night. I sat in the laundry room on the cold concrete floor with my back against the dryer because it was warm, and I thought about the Thanksgiving 3 years ago when Sasha had cried in my bathroom, and I had sat with her for 40 minutes while Kevin paced downstairs, and she had said, "I don't know what I would do without you, Winifred. I really don't." I thought about Christmas 2 years ago when Marcus got the stomach flu at midnight, and I drove across town in a snowstorm because Sasha's parents were in Florida, and Kevin panics in a crisis. I thought about last spring when Kevin's deal fell through and he was so low for so long, and I made him soup twice a week, and I did not make him talk about it until he was ready. I thought about the Thursday dinners. Every Thursday for 9 years, since Marcus was born, I had driven to their house in Burlington and made dinner, pot roast in the winter, pasta in the summer. Whatever the kids wanted for their birthdays, 9 years of Thursdays. I had never once been asked. I had offered and they had accepted, and it had simply become the shape of things. I sat on that floor and I thought, when did I become someone they work around? I did not cry. I am not sure why. Maybe there was nothing left to wring out. That night I made myself a cup of tea. Red rose, 2 sugars the way my mother made it. And I sat at the kitchen table and I opened the small notebook I keep in the drawer by the phone. I have kept a notebook there for years. Walter used to leave me notes in it when he left early for work. After he died, I kept putting notebooks in that drawer out of habit. This one had 3 pages of grocery lists and a phone number I couldn't identify. I turned to a clean page and I wrote the date at the top. November 4th. Then I wrote, "Things I have given. I sat there for 2 hours. I am not someone who thinks about money much. Walter and I were not wealthy, but we were careful, and the house is paid off, and I have my pension from 30 years of teaching, grade 4 at St. Anne's, and I have Walter's life insurance, and I am fine. I have always been fine, and I have never made a point of saying so. But that night, I started writing. The Thursday dinners, groceries, gas, 9 years. The hockey equipment I bought Marcus when Kevin said they were stretched that month, and never mentioned it again. The trip to emergency with Marcus's broken wrist, while Kevin and Sasha were at a conference in Calgary. I had paid the parking because I'd left in a hurry and had nothing but a 20 in my wallet, and I'd never brought it up. The week I had the grandchildren while Kevin and Sasha went to Costa Rica. Sasha had brought me back a small ceramic turtle. It is on my windowsill. I have always genuinely liked it. The TFSA I set up for Marcus when he was born. The one I set up for his little sister Abby 2 years later. I put in the maximum every year. Neither Kevin nor Sasha had ever asked me about them. They knew they existed. We had signed the paperwork together. They were just there, the way I was just there, reliably the way the roads are ploughed, and the hydro stays on. I sat at that table, and I did not feel sorry for myself. I want to be precise about this. I felt something colder and clearer than self-pity. I felt like a woman looking at a ledger who had simply never added up the columns before, and now that she had, she could see exactly what the numbers said. The numbers said, "You have been available, you have been useful, you have not been valued. There is a difference." I finished the tea. I washed the cup. I went to bed. I did not sleep much. In the morning I called my financial advisor. Her name is Trish, and I have known her since Kevin was in high school, and she has very good judgment, and she does not fuss. I told her I wanted to review everything, all of it, my will, the TFSAs, my power of attorney, the beneficiaries on the insurance policies, everything. Trish said, "Are you all right, Winifred?" I said I was fine. I said I just wanted to understand the full picture. She said she could see me Thursday. I said not Thursday. Could we do Wednesday? She said yes. I put down the phone and I stood in my kitchen for a moment looking out at the backyard. The garden was done for the year. I had pulled everything up in October, the way I always do. The beds were covered in mulch. The rose canes were wrapped in burlap. It looked neat and intentional and cared for, and it occurred to me that no one had ever asked me to do any of that. I did it because I wanted a garden in the spring. I did it for myself. I thought, when did I stop applying that same logic to everything else? I called Nora that evening, which was a Wednesday, not our usual Sunday. She picked up on the second ring the way she always does, because she worries about me a little, which I appreciate. I told her what I'd heard. There was a silence on her end that lasted long enough that I knew she was choosing her words. She said, "Mom, how long has this been going on?" I said I didn't know exactly, probably longer than I'd let myself see. She was quiet again. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" And that was the right question. Not what should you do, not here's what I think, not do you want me to call Kevin. Just what do you want? I said I was still figuring that out. I met Trish on Wednesday morning at her office on Lakeshore. She had coffee ready and she did not make small talk, which is one of the things I have always liked about her. We went through everything. It took 2.5 hours. The TFSAs for the grandchildren were healthy. Combined, between Marcus and Abby, there was enough in there that it would matter to them when they were old enough to use it. For school, for a first home, for whatever they needed. That had always been the point. That part I did not want to change. The children had done nothing wrong. They were 9 and 7, and they still drew me pictures on construction paper, and they are the best thing in any room they walk into. But the rest of it, the will, the beneficiaries, the power of attorney, we talked through all of it carefully. I told Trish I wanted to change my power of attorney. I had named Kevin. I wanted to name Nora instead. I told her I wanted to update my will. She asked me what I had in mind. I told her. She did not try to talk me out of anything. She took notes. She said she would have the documents ready within 2 weeks, and I could review them before I signed anything. She asked if I wanted her to recommend an estate lawyer to make it official. I said yes, please. She walked me to the door, and she said, "You seem clear." I said I was. The house felt different when I got home. Not smaller, not sadder. Just more mine somehow. I made lunch, and I ate it standing at the counter, looking out the window, and I thought about what Walter would have said. Walter was a quiet man with very good instincts. He would have said something simple. He would have said, "You always knew, Freddie. You just needed to hear it out loud. He called me Freddie. No one else does. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. I called Kevin the Saturday before and I told him I wouldn't be coming this year. I kept my voice pleasant and level. I told him I had decided to visit Nora in Vancouver. I told him I'd booked the flights. He said, "Oh." A pause. "Really?" I said yes. He said, "Mom, Sasha and I were counting on you two. I mean, the kids are expecting." I said I was sure they would have a lovely Thanksgiving and that I would call the kids on the day. He said, "Is everything okay?" I said everything was fine. I said I thought it would be good for me to have a change this year. There was a silence. Then he said, "Okay, sure, have a good trip." I hung up, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I breathed slowly for a moment, the way my doctor has told me to do when my blood pressure wants to misbehave. Then I called Air Canada. I had not been to Vancouver since the summer before Walter died. Nora met me at the airport with a coffee and a look on her face I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, that particular combination of fierce and tender that meant she was trying not to cry. We hugged in the arrivals hall for a long time while people moved around us with their luggage carts. We spent 4 days walking. Nora lives in Kitsilano, 2 blocks from the water, and every morning we went out early before the runners took over, and we walked along the seawall and we talked. We talked about Walter. We talked about her work, which she loves. We talked about Kevin, carefully and without drama, the way adults talk about people they both love, who have also caused them pain. On the 3rd night, over wine at her kitchen table, Nora said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." I said I would try. She said, "Are you doing this because you're angry, or because you've decided something?" I thought about it. I said, "Both, but mostly the second one." She nodded. She said, "Good, I think that's the right way." She asked if Kevin knew anything yet. I said no. I said I would tell him at Christmas, which I had decided to spend at home in Oakville, on my own terms. She said, "On your own terms, meaning what?" I said, meaning I would invite who I wanted to invite. I would cook what I wanted to cook. I would not drive across town in the snowstorm unless it was my idea. I would not be the last to arrive and the first to start cleaning up. I would not sit at the table and feel like a guest in my own December. Nora was quiet. Then she said, "Can I come?" I said I was counting on it. I got home from Vancouver on a Tuesday, and the house was cool and quiet, and the garden beds were still neat under their burlap and mulch. I stood in the front hall with my suitcase, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, something more structural than happiness, something like, "This is mine, and I know what I have, and I know what I'm going to do with it." I called Trish the next morning. The documents were ready for review. I sat down with the estate lawyer, a brisk woman named Margot who did not waste anyone's time, and I went through everything line by line. The changes were not punitive. That is important to me. I was not building a weapon. I was building a boundary which is different. Marcus and Abby's TFSAs were untouched. They would be fine, better than fine. But the house, the insurance, the rest of it, those I realigned according to what I actually wanted, not according to what I actually wanted, not according to what I had assumed was expected of me. I signed the documents on a Thursday, which felt, I admit, slightly pointed, but not unpleasantly so. Kevin came by the week before Christmas with the children. They tumbled in the door with their boots on, and Abby immediately went to look for the tin of shortbread I keep on the second shelf of the pantry, which she has known about since she was 3. Marcus asked if we could play rummy. I said yes. Kevin stood in the kitchen looking at me with an expression I could not quite read. After the kids settled in the living room with the shortbread and the cards, he said, "You seem different." I said, "Do I?" He said, "I don't know. Lighter, maybe." I poured 2 cups of tea and set his on the counter near him, and I said, "Kevin, I want to talk to you about something." He looked immediately cautious. He has always done that. When he was 8 years old and I said those words, he would brace like he was about to be told bad news. I told him, as calmly and directly as I could, that I had heard the conversation in my kitchen in November. I told him I wasn't angry. I told him I wanted him to understand that what I had heard had changed something for me. Not in a dramatic way, but in a real one. I told him I had made some changes to my estate planning and that Nora was now my power of attorney. I told him the grandchildren were taken care of. I told him that would never change. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his tea. He said, "Mom, I said, "You don't have to say anything right now." He said, I'm sorry you heard that, and I'm sorry because I think I already knew it wasn't right. I think I've known for a while." I looked at my son, and I saw the 7-year-old who helped me paint the shutters, and also the 41-year-old who had let things slide in a direction he should have corrected sooner. Both of those things were true at the same time. I have found at 68 that most things are. I said, "I know." He picked up his tea and we stood in the kitchen together for a moment, not saying anything. From the living room, we could hear Marcus dealing cards and Abby arguing about something with the focused intensity she brings to everything. He said, "Are you still making a turkey for Christmas?" I said I was. He said, "Can we come?" I said, "Yes, but you're doing the dishes." He laughed. It was a real laugh, the surprised kind. He said, "Deal." Nora flew in on the 23rd. She and Kevin have not always been easy together, but that Christmas they managed it. They did the dishes side by side after dinner, and I could hear them talking in the kitchen while I sat in the living room with Abby asleep against my shoulder, and Marcus explaining to Walter's old cat why she should be more interested in hockey. I sat there in the lamplight, and I thought about the woman who had sat on the cold laundry room floor 6 weeks earlier, and I thought she was right to stay quiet. She was right to wait. She was right to count up the columns and decide for herself what the numbers meant. She didn't need to scream to be heard. She just needed to understand her own worth before she could ask anyone else to. Outside, the snow had started again. That soft, particular snow that comes in southern Ontario in late December, the kind that sticks to the window glass and makes the whole street go quiet. I could see it from the armchair. The garden was out there somewhere under all of it, already resting, already waiting for what I'd make of it in spring. I was looking forward to spring. I think about that laundry room floor more than I expected to, the cold of it, the hum of the dryer against my back, the way I sat there and didn't cry, which surprised me at the time but doesn't anymore. What I've come to understand is that the hurt wasn't the most important thing that happened that day. The most important thing was what came after the hurt, the decision to sit still long enough to actually think, rather than react, That's harder than it sounds. When someone wounds you, everything in you wants to move quickly. Say something. Defend yourself. Make them understand what they've done. But I've learned, at 68, that the moments when I've acted from pain have rarely produced anything I was proud of. The moments I'm proud of are the quiet ones, the ones where I waited until I knew what I actually wanted. That's what Winifred did. She didn't pick up the phone and confront Kevin that same evening. She sat with it. She thought about it honestly, not just about what he'd said, but about what she had allowed to go unexamined for years. That kind of honesty takes something. It takes the willingness to look at your own choices alongside someone else's, which is not comfortable. But it's the only way to understand a situation clearly enough to do something useful with it. There's a word I keep coming back to, and it's clarity. Not anger, not revenge, not even justice, just clarity. Knowing exactly what you have, what you've given, what it's worth, and what you're willing to do differently. When Winifred sat at her kitchen table and started writing things down, she wasn't building a case against her son. She was finally giving herself permission to see the full picture. That, to me, is a kind of courage that doesn't get talked about enough. The courage to face something true that you've been quietly avoiding. And then she acted on what she found, not with a scene, not with accusations. She made appointments. She called her daughter. She got on a plane. She signed papers. She made a turkey and told Kevin he was doing the dishes. These are not dramatic gestures. They are the small, steady actions of someone who has decided to take herself seriously. That's what I find most moving about her. Not the outcome, but the discipline it took to get there, to keep going calmly, step by step, even when part of her must have wanted to just call Kevin and cry about it. I think about what I want for the people who watch this. I want them to see that it's never too late to look at the ledger honestly, not the financial one, but the one we keep inside ourselves, the one that tracks what we've given, what we've accepted, what we've pretended not to notice. And I want them to see that when the numbers tell you something hard, the answer isn't bitterness. The answer is a clear decision made with a steady hand. Winifred didn't get a perfect ending. Kevin has more work to do. So does Sasha. So probably does Winifred herself. But she got something more durable than a perfect ending. She got her own life back, on her own terms, in her own kitchen, with snow on the garden, and her daughter at the table, and her grandchildren arguing about cards in the next room. That's not nothing, that's everything.